Okay, Parak Gimel. Everybody with me? Okay, Parak Gimel, Psukim Aleph through Chaf, Parshas Vayishlach, page 176 in the art scroll, if you wish to follow. I've entitled it Esav and Yaakov Reunite. Here, these are the psukim, these 20 psukim of how Yaakov and Esav meet after all of these years, after 21 years. Remember, they parted with Esav swearing that he's going to kill Yaakov. He's not a very happy brother that the brachos were stolen from him. He claims twice, right? Even though he sold the first one. But so he's pretty angry at Yaakov when Yaakov has to escape. And now 21 years later, they reunite. Let's see. Well, Rav Soloveitchik is not interested in, again, reading these psukim like a Rashi. Rather, he is interested in seeing what lessons we can learn about our future relationship with Esav as we reunite with Esav. He wants to understand what Esav wanted and how Yaakov responded. And it has tremendous ramifications ad hayom hazeh during our present situation with Esav. So let's take a look. Vayiso Yaakov eino vayar v'nei Esav ba v'imo arba meot ish vayachatz hayeladim aleya v'al rochel v'ashtei hashvachot. Yaakov lifts his eyes and he sees, behold, Esav was coming. With him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two handmaids. Vayosem es hashvachot es yaldehen rishona, ves Leah v'yolodea acharonim, ves Rachel ves Yosef acharonim. So he divides them with the shvachot and their children first, then Leah and her children. Leah has the most children, of course, 6 of the shvatim, and then Rachel and Yosef last. He places himself in front of all of them. And he bows 7 times until he reaches his brother. Esav ran towards him, he embraces him, he falls on his neck, he kisses him, and they wept. Okay? Whoops. Okay. There we go. I forgot to turn on the video itself. Okay, now that's been corrected. Pasuk. Vayisa eseino vayares hanashim v'sayeladim vayomer mi elelach vayomer hayeladim asher chanan elokim es avdecha. He raises his eyes and saw the women and children, and he asks, Esav asks, tell me, Yaakov, who are these with you? And Yaakov answers, these are the children who HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed me with. And then the handmaids, remember, they went first, so they go first. They come forward, and they and their children, and they bow to Esav. And then Leah comes with her children, her 6 shvatim, and they bow. And then finally Yosef and Rachel came forward and bowed. Right? Interesting, the Mefarshim Rashi points out, Yosef is mentioned before Rachel. Yosef is a young boy, but Yosef immediately tried to protect his mother, so he ran in front of her. Vayomer mil lecha kol hamachana hazeh asher pagashti vayomer limsochein beinei Adoni. And he asked, what did you do? What did you intend by the whole camp that I met? And he answered, to gain favor in my Lord's eyes. And Pasuk test. And Esau said, I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. He says, I'm fine. Esau says, I have a lot. So you keep yours, I'll keep mine. Vayomer Yaakov, Alna imno matzasi chen beinecha v'lakachta min chasimi yadi ki al kein ro'isi ponecha kiroses pnei Elokim v'tirtzeni. And Yaakov answers, no, I beg of you, if I have found favor in your eyes, then accept my gift I'm sending to you, I'm giving you, inasmuch as I've seen your face, which is like seeing the face of a divine being, that you were appeased by me. I'm giving you a gift, and this would make me the happiest person in the world. Kachno es berchasi asher uvasaloch ki chanani Elokim v'chiyeshli kol vayitsarbo vayikach. Pasuk 11. Please accept my gift which was brought to you, inasmuch as God has been gracious to me, and I have everything I need. Not I have much. Remember, he said much. I have much. Right? Esav said much. Yaakov says I have everything, and he urged him that he accepts his gift. Kachnos birchasi asher vasi ki luchanani alkim b'chi yesh lo kol vayivsar bo v'yikach. Vayomer, and now, Nisov ne'chol ve'chol negdecha. And Esav answers, travel on, let us go. I will proceed alongside you. Let us go together. We'll travel together. Right? Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayomer ilav Adoni. Yodea kol ha'yeladim rakim v'atzon v'apakor alos alai u'defakum yom echad v'mesu kol hatzon. And Yaakov answers, my Lord knows that the children are tender, and they're young children, and nursing flocks and cattle are upon me. I have children, I have flocks. If they'll be driven hard for a single day, then the flocks will die and won't be good for anybody. Yavor no Adoni lifnei avdo vani esnahalo liiti leregel hamalocha shel lefanai uleregel hayoladim ad asher havo el Adoni seira. And he answers, Yaakov says, let my Lord go ahead of his servant. You go on your own, Esav. I will make my way at my slow pace according to the gait of the drove from before me and the gait of the children until I come to my Lord at Seir. Vayomer Esav, then Esav said, let me assign to you some of the people who are with me. And he said, to what purpose? Let me just have favor in your Lord's eyes. In other words, he's offering, he wants to give him help. And what does Yaakov say? You keep your help. I don't need it. I'll be fine. I'm very thankful that you're offering it to me. But what's important to me is that we've reunited. So Pasuk Tesvav. Tezayin, excuse me. Vayosha bayamahu Esav ledarko Seira. And so Esav started back on his way to Seir. Yaakov nosas Sukoso, and Yaakov then travels to Sukkos. Vayiven lo bayis, and there he builds a house. Ulemikneo asas Sukkos, and then he builds Sukkos for his shelters for his cattle. Alken karoshma shem hamakom Sukkot, and that's why he calls the place Sukkot. Hayavol Yaakov shalem Yerushem asher be'eretz Canaan bevomi padan aram vayichan es pnei Yair. And Yaakov arrived intact. Everything was fine with Yaakov. He gets to Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. Upon his arriving from Padan Aram, he encamped before the city. Vayikin es chalkas hasodah asher noto sham ahalo miyad b'nei chamor avishchem b'meor kesita. The second purchase that is documented in Chumash in the Torah. The first purchase, of course, was Marasa Machpelah. Here, Yaakov purchases Shechem, right? He bought the parcel of land upon which he pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesita. What does he use that land for? The burial of Yosef. Yosef is going to be buried there. Vayatzev sham mizbeach vayikra El Elohei Yisrael, and he set up an altar. There he proclaimed El Elohei Yisrael. We'll talk about exactly what does that mean. Translated here, God, the God of Israel. Okay, those are the psukim that we are going to analyze. Again, the Rav wants to understand what lessons can we learn from this reunification, right? Reuniting of Yaakov and Esav. Are there any lessons for the future? Or is it just a story in the past, a story that the Torah tells us it happened once, nothing to learn? And of course, that's not the way we learn Chumash. Certainly in the Rav's Gestalt fashion, he says tremendous lessons to be learned. So he starts with Pasuk Daled. The first thing he's fascinated by in this story, again, the Rav is not going Pasuk by Pasuk. That's not his approach. It's a Gestalt approach, right? So the Rav is wondering, when I look at these psukim, what jumps at me right away? This pasuk, Vayoratz Esav likraso, Vayichabkeu, Vayipol al tzavaro, Vayishakeu, Vayivku. He ran. Esav runs to grab Yaakov. Yaakov, he wonders, whoa. Yaakov was hated by Esav. Yaakov swore he harbored a animosity to Yaakov. So how could Esav now come running with warmth and with acceptance? What happened? What transformed? What happened that transformed Esav into a loving brother from a hating brother who was still burning over the fact that the bracha was taken from him by Yaakov? So what is it? So the Rav suggests a two-pronged answer that motivates Esav. And when you understand this, you begin to understand the whole story here. First of all, he says, Yaakov brilliantly strategized how he was going to encounter Esav. He knew darn well his brother harbored a strong animosity to him. There was no doubt about it. He took the brachos away from him, and he was very, very, very upset over it, correct? So he's very concerned. So how does Yaakov strategize how he's going to meet Esav? So he accomplishes it very carefully, very carefully. At the beginning of the parsha, Yaakov sent messengers to announce that he was coming to see Esav. What does he not do? He doesn't show up knocking at the door, suddenly surprising Esav. That's not what he does. He sends messengers. Nothing is going to be a surprise for Esav. Esav is going to be informed. Yaakov is on his way. He didn't sneak up unannounced. Rather, he stages the moment, and he stages it very carefully. If you remember, Rashi, quoting the Medrash, says that he does three things. He does, number one, he sends a gift, a greeting. He sends a gift. Number two, he prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he should intervene on his behalf. And number three, he prepares for war if he has to go to war. Those are the three things. So Yaakov is doing what? Yaakov is strategizing. Yaakov is not knocking on the door, surprising Esav at all. And it works like a charm. Esav clearly was quite moved by Yaakov's presence, and his presence is the presence he sends him, right? It worked like a charm, just like Yaakov had intended it. It's beautiful. That's what the Rav notes, number one. That's prong number one, answer number one. But number two, he notes, the second point is that that Esav realized that Birkas Avraham was not his. Birkas Avraham was intended for Yaakov. How does he know that? Because it was contingent upon a command that Esav defied his parents with, and that was marrying the Benos Canaan. He married Benos Canaan. Yaakov was the son that listened to his parents' command not to marry Benos Canaan. So Esav understands, the Rav points out, that he is not going to get at all Birkas Avram. Birkas Avram is only for Yaakov, who followed his parents' instructions not to marry Benos Canaan. And therefore, the Rav notes that Esav is demonstrating his ability to be, to a certain degree, about tshuva. He's putting aside his anger that he had, realizing the truth is, Birkas Avram is not mine. And because of this, the Medrash claims that Esav could have been about tshuva. He was demonstrating a component of willing to change, and Yaakov didn't pick up on it. And Yaakov, the Medrash, reprimands him for not giving his daughter Dinah to Esav. Remember, Medrash gets very angry. Why didn't you give Dinah to Esav? And in our right minds, who would want to give, if you're the father of Dinah, you want to give him to Esav? You want to give her to Esav? No. But Chazal is looking at it from a bigger picture. He says Esav is demonstrating an element of tshuva here. He's willing to change. He's willing to put aside his anger that he has to kill Yaakov. He's willing to change. And Yaakov, you should have picked up on it. And Yaakov, you should have encouraged it. And you didn't sufficiently encourage it. And the Medrash is critical of Yaakov for that. So again, how does this transformation happen? It happens, number one, because just pragmatically, Yaakov strategized and it worked like a charm. He sent gifts and it worked like a charm. Number two, Esav has a transformation also, and he comes to the realization, I'm not the one who deserves Birkas Avram. Birkas Avram has to go to the son who was willing to follow the instructions of the parents not to marry Benos Canaan. I violated that, therefore I can't get Birkas Avram. Esav admits that to himself, and those are the two reasons that you see a transformation here, and they can meet on a peaceful level. Now the Rav says, okay, they meet, and then what does Esav turn to Yaakov and say? Let's travel together. Pasuk Yud Beis. Vayomer Nisav elcha ve'elcha lenegdecha. Let's go together. We'll travel along, and I will go alongside you. We're going to travel along. And the Rav says, this is an important lesson, not just for Esav and Yaakov as a moment in biblical history, not at all. He says this reflects the historic argument that the non-Jews have given for their right to anti-Semitism. What does he mean by this? He says throughout history, they want us to be just like them. There's a nation that is different, as the Pasuk says in Esther, right? There's a nation, Haman says, that is nothing like us. They're nothing like us. Everything they do is different, right? They want us to be just like them. They want us to assimilate. They can't understand. Am levadad yishkon. Right, is where we realize that that's not a curse, that's a bracha, right? They can't understand why we have to act so differently. We even, Rav Soloveitchik says, we even write differently. We write right to left. They write left to right. Even the way we write is different. Our language is different. Everything about us is different. There is nothing that's alike. This insistence of being different bothers the anti-Semite. This is a different nation. Why can't they be like us? And Yaakov responds in Pasuk Yudalit. He gives an answer. Yavorno Adoni lifnei avado. No, you go ahead, Esav. Va'ani et nahalol iti leregel hamalocha asher lefonai leregel hayoladim ad asher avo et Adoni seira. We'll go at our own pace, but we'll eventually get to Seira. Seira is what? Har Seir. Who lives in Har Seir? That's Esav. Esav lives in Har Seir. So Yaakov is responding and he says, there will be a time where we'll unite. When will it be? When I arrive to Seir. When am I going to arrive to Seir? Well, the Navi Ovadia tells us, the only Navi that's one parak long. The Navi Ovadia tells us, when are we going to arrive to Seir? B'yamos HaMashiach. In the Messianic day, we'll unite. Then the saviors, as the Pasuk says, the saviors will ascend Mount Zion, right, Har Tzion, to judge Esav's mountain. It will only be then that Esav will also recognize the God as the master of the universe. Then he'll recognize, up until now, Yaakov is telling him, you have your approach, I have my approach. And they're not going to unite. They're not going to unite, no matter how we try. On this world that we live in, it's not going to unite. It will be when we arrive to Seir. When will that be? B'yamos HaMashiach. But there's another lesson also being taught by these words that reverberate to this very day. Yaakov received Birchas Avraham. What's Birchas Avraham? Birchas Avraham is also, it contains the right to inherit Eretz Yisrael, because he did not marry Benos Canaan. Esav understood that he could not change this because he married Benos Canaan, so he doesn't get Eretz Yisrael. But at this point, however, Esav asks Yaakov, but let me have a little of it. Let me go with you. Let me be right outside you. Let me taste what it's like. I want part of Eretz Yisrael. And what does Yaakov answer? Yaakov rejects it. You're Seir, I'm Eretz Yisrael. The two can't go hand in hand. This, the Rav understands, is a text for all eternity. That's what's so important about this text. It's not, as I keep on saying, a moment frozen in biblical history where Yaakov meets Esav after 21 years. No, what's happening here reflects what we are experiencing to this very day, right? With Esav. We have this contest with Esav. And Esav wants us to be like him. And Yaakov says, sorry, it's not going to be. You're not going to get Eretz Yisrael. You're going to be in Seir. I'm going to be in Eretz Yisrael. Continues on. Then Pasuk Yudalit. Ad asher avo el Adoni seira. Here Yaakov responds to Esav's request that he share, right? And we pointed out that he shared because Avraham with him. He rejects the idea that Esav actually has to leave Eretz Yisrael. And what does Esav do in Pasuk Tezayin? What does he do? He understands it. Vayoshav bayomahu Esav the darko seira. He gets it. Esav then leaves Eretz Yisrael and he goes to Seir. Rashi quotes the Gemara that Yaakov never traveled to Seir. Yaakov never, he says, I'll meet you in Seir. That's what the pasuk, he never goes to Seir. Ovadia tells us it will be. When will we go to Seir? We will go to Seir only in the Messianic age. And then we will conquer Seir. But until then, we're not going to Seir. Until that time, as the Rav points out, Yaakov and Esav will be engaged in many battles. We're going to engage in many battles against each other. Some we will win, some Esav will win. Which ones? We're not told. But there will be many battles. And some battles we will win, and some battles Esav is going to win. This is the allusion being taught to in these psukim. Now let's go to the last pasuk that the Rav focuses on, which is the very end here. Pasuk Chaf. Let's take a look at pasuk Chaf. Vayatsev sham mizbeach, vayikra lo el Elohei Yisrael. And then what does he do? As always, at the end of the story, he sets up a mizbeach and he proclaims El Elohei Yisrael. Is it El or El? Kel? Does this mean God? He translates it here, God, the God of Israel. El Elohei Yisrael. Or does El mean no, something else? It means Yaakov. It's an allusion to Yaakov. El Elokei Yisrael. Elokei Yisrael is the God of Yaakov. Is that what it means? In other words, the word here means Hashem, as it's translated in our scroll. But Rashi cites a Gemara in Megillah Yud Ches Amud Aleph that translates this phrase totally differently. The Gemara understands the word to mean, and the God of Israel called him, right? Vayikra lo, and the God, and he called him. Who called? Who called? El to Yaakov, Elokei Yisrael. Elokei Yisrael called to Yaakov. That's how the Gemara understands it. The Rav
isn't the lo
Vayikra lo El, right? Both Vayikra lo to him,
yeah.
El Yaakov. That's how the Gemara reads it. To Yaakov, Elokei Yisrael, the God of Yisrael called to Yaakov. And another name for Yaakov here is El. Okay? That's how the Gemara understands it. Well, this raises a tremendous, number one, we should note, a halachic quandary. A halachic quandary. If it's God's name or if it's not God's name is very important. Why? Because when a sofer writes a Sefer Torah, every time he writes HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, may it be Yud Kei Vav Kei or Elokim, and it means Elokim, not judges. It means Elokim and not Elohim. Or Shakai, he must write it with Kavana, that's a Shem Hashem. He, the sofer, must have Kavana as he's writing. He must have Kavana intent. I am writing one of God's names. And if he doesn't have that Kavana when he writes it, he invalidates the Torah. He can write a whole Sefer Torah from Bereshis to the Zos HaBracha. He can invalidate Pasal a whole Sefer Torah if he doesn't have the Kavana that it's Hashem's name that he's writing. And if it's not Hashem's name, and he has Kavana that it is God's name, he also invalidates it. He has to know what he's writing. And if he writes here, is it Yaakov's name or is it Hashem's name? Which is it? And the sofer has to know. Because if the sofer doesn't know, he's going to invalidate his soul Sefer Torah. So halachically, we rule like the translation in front of you that ArtScroll says. What does this mean? El Elokei Yisrael means it's Hashem. El means Hashem, okay? According to this, the sofer has to have kavana when he writes El here, Hashem's name. But there's another lesson being taught in this verse as well. The Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah cites an enigmatic comment that Yaakov makes. The Medrash says, it inserts it into this pasuk. And the Medrash says, Yaakov turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Yaakov says, it's an enigmatic Medrash, but you're going to see it is a powerful, profound Medrash that sums up this whole story. Yaakov turns to God and he says, you know, Hashem, you're God above, I'm God below. You hear this? It sounds totally inappropriate, right? It sounds like, huh? Well, Yaakov is considering himself a God, a divinity, a deity. He says, God, you're God, Bashamayim. I'm God below. What can these words possibly mean? Rashi's not, the Medrash is not suggesting that Yaakov was a heretic, and Yaakov was suggesting that he's a divine power, God forbid. So what does the Medrash mean? So Rav Soloveitchik brilliantly understands this Medrash based on a pasuk in the Torah. There's a command, v'halachta b'dirachav. What's v'halachta b'dirachav mean? We are to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fancy language, it's called an Atasho Dei. We are to imitate the deity, the Almighty himself. Everything God, remember the Gemara says, God clothes the naked, we should clothe the naked. God buries the dead, he did by Moshe, right? We should bury the dead. God was Mevakir Chola, that's what the Gemara says. God was Mevakir Chola by Avram, by the Bris Milah, we should be Mevakir Chola. God takes care of everybody, we should take care. We are to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now the Rav says, I get it. What was Yaakov saying in this pasuk? El Elo Vayikra Lo, El Elokei Yisrael. The Medrash says he turns to God and he says, God, you're God above, I'm God below. In other words, we're to imitate you. Imitashodei. But how does man know how to imitate you, God? How does he achieve this? How does he do that? So the Rav notes that Yaakov is saying, we on this earth, meaning the avos, the imahos, will be the models that people will follow, so they know how to act in your image. They don't know you, God. How do they know you, God? You placed us here to be the examples of how we are to model ourselves. In other words, Yaakov says to Hashem, you are God above, the angels observe you. They know how you function. They imitate you. But I am God below. Man is going to observe me and through my actions learn about you. Because they will see I am an Eved Hashem. I am imitating you. That's what Yaakov was telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What this means, the Rav points out, is an important lesson. That the divine presence is reflected in our leaders. Our leaders have to be such pious people that we learn how to act from them. We look at them and we say, this is the way to act. For example, the Rav notes, let's analyze this for a few seconds, the Rav says. What does this mean historically? Well, Yitzchak. Yitzchak does what? Yitzchak stands for what? Yitzchak. Gvura. Yitzchak represents the willingness to be the Akedah. So sacrifice. Oh, sacrifice. Yitzchak teaches us rule number one, a constant rule that the Rav always taught. The Jew has to live a life of self-sacrifice in all its dimensions. Self-sacrifice manifests itself in numerous components of our lives. Let me give you an example. We eat differently than everyone else. They want us to eat with them. And we say, no, we only keep kosher. Well, that's a self-sacrifice quite often. For a lot of people, that is a sacrifice that they can't abide by. They just can't abide. What you're telling me, I can't eat the food with my neighbor, with my good friend, with my non-Jewish partner. I have to eat differently. I can't go into his home. He can come into my home, but I can't go into his home and eat. I can't drink his wine. What if they touch my wine that becomes not kosher? What are you talking about? The Jew, number one, self-sacrifice in every component, and it's taught to us by Yitzchak. I'll give you another example. We celebrate differently as Shabbos. They celebrate on Sunday. We celebrate it on Shabbos. How many at the turn of the 20th century that came from Europe had to give up Shabbos if they were going to survive? If you were willing to self-sacrifice, every Monday you lost your job. I know individuals in this community whose parents were so devoted to Yiddishkeit, the self-sacrifice of Yitzchak, that model, that every Monday they would not show on Saturday. They were told, you don't come Saturday, don't show up on Monday. Right? Self-sacrifice. They self-sacrificed. Now, today it's not so difficult. We go into the store, we can buy. Remember, as kids, it wasn't like that, right? Now you can buy anything anywhere in basically the world that doesn't have hashgacha. You could go into any supermarket and find items that have kashrus hashgacha. It's unbelievable. It's a different world. But there was a time when that was tremendous self-sacrifice. There was a time, Shabbos, it wasn't a 5-day week. It was a 6-day working week. And one of those days of work was Shabbos, and you were expected to be there. I know David Hershkowitz, his father, Zichrono Livracha, David's father, Isaac Hershkowitz, had a gas station. And for years, they didn't want to give him gas if he wasn't going to be open on Shabbos. That was the most important. And he said, I'm sorry. He was like Yitzchak. David's father was like Yitzchak. He sacrificed. That self-sacrifice is the Jew. I'll give you another example. The Rav says, you're davening, you're traveling, and you have to put tefillin on a plane, and it's not El Al, right? I remember as a kid, I flew to Eretz Yisrael via what's the Greek airline? I forget what it was called. No. The Greek airline. I forget the name of it. I flew on the Greek airline to Eretz Yisrael, got off in Athens, and then flew on to Eretz Yisrael. Well, whatever the name was, I did, and you had to put on tefillin, and I think I was the only Jew on that flight. Okay, you got to do it. You got to do it. You're standing in an airport, and it's time to daven, and there's no telephones anymore that you can stand. Right? Remember those days? Like you used to take off the phone and stand there like you're talking to the phone and daven. What? There are no pay phones anymore. No, that's all Yitzchak. That's the Rav is telling us. We want to know imitation of Hakadosh, imitatio Dei. Yitzchak teaches us sacrifice. What does Yaakov teach us? Remember, the Rav says, Yaakov is telling us here, I will, in other words, our Avos will be the God here on earth, the representation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on earth. What did Yaakov teach us? Yaakov taught us tzedakah. Yaakov is the tithe, right? Go back. What does Yaakov say in 28:22? Go back to Chav Ches. Chav Ches. Chav Beis. Back on page 146. V'chol asher titenli aser asrenu lach, and from everything you give me, I will tithe. Isn't that what Yaakov teaches us? Aser asrenu lach. Yaakov teaches us, Yitzchak teaches us sacrifice. What does Yaakov teach us? The art of giving tzedakah. The Rav famously noted that when his uncle Rav Velvel Soloveitchik, famous the Brisker Rav of Yerushalayim, he survived and he came to Yerushalayim. Rav Velvel. Rav Velvel was the Rav's uncle, his father's brother. Rav Moshe was his father, and Velvel was his uncle. Rav Yitzchak, he was Rav Velvel. That's how he was known. When he became a Rav, Reb Chaim Brisker, who was Rav Velvel's father, the Rav's grandfather, turned to him and he said to him, I want you to listen very carefully. You're going to be a Rav. The first lesson a Rav needs to know is not how to answer shilas in halacha. That's the second lesson. The first lesson is that you're to be a Baal Chesed. A Rav has to be a Baal Chesed. A Rav has to be a Baal Tzedakah. You have to be willing to give tzedakah. If you don't give tzedakah, you can't be a Rav. Yaakov taught us this. Aser asrenu lach, that a Jew has to know that the money he has is not his own. Who gave him the money? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't belong to us. Hashem gave it to him, and Hashem can take it just as quickly. That a Jew has to know. It's no chachma. Why do we say a person who's miserly, like he's oved avodah zarah, the Gemara says, if he doesn't give, Check the Gemara says, if that's right, check his heredity. Check who he is. Check his lineage. Why? Because a Jew has to know how to give if he's a Ben Yaakov. He's a Ben Yaakov, he has to know that his money isn't his own. When you take off your meiser from your wages and you give it to tzedakah, you're not giving your own. It's not yours. It's Hashem's. And Hashem made you a shaliach. Give it. That's what Yaakov taught us. The Rav noted in a Parsha Shir in 1956 that he gave in Boston the following. He said the following, I quote him: the first way that a person makes a shem tov, a good reputation, is through chesed. The first way, if you want to make a good reputation, you do it through chesed. There is nothing that people respect as much as chesed, as much as those who give money. I see people that give money generously, with full hearts, and people look at such men in a different light. He can have 100 faults, but people look at him differently. If he fulfills the mitzvah of pasoach tiftach, you shall surely open your hand and give to the poor. And the opposite is true as well, the Rav notes. Somebody can have 100 milas, 100 wonderful attributes, but if he doesn't give tzedakah, the community looks at him with eyes of he's not a good person. He can have 100 wonderful attributes, but he's not generous with his money. People write him off. If you will, this is what Yaakov taught us. Okay? Yaakov taught us the second lesson, tzedakah. What did Yosef teach us? The Rav goes through all of this. What did Yosef teach us? All from this pasuk, all from this parsha. What did Yosef teach us? Yosef teaches us that you don't take revenge, right? Yosef taught us you don't take revenge, even if the people that tried really want to harm you. As a kid, I remember reading so many stories about Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook. He was maligned bitterly by the Charedim in Yerushalayim and in Eretz Yisrael for his Zionistic approach, right? He was maligned. They had contempt for Rav Cook, and they treated him miserably. And yet, so often, they would, because the Rav Cook had a position of influence, an enormous position of influence, and if they needed something, they would come through the back door to ask Rav Cook to help them. And Rav Cook helped every one of them. Why? Because he's a Ben Yosef. A Ben Yosef doesn't take revenge. That's the third lesson. What does Moshe teach us? And the Rav tells us, Moshe teaches us one word: patience. Enormous patience. Moshe was the one who saw the good in the children of Israel, despite our repeated infractions in the Midbar, right? If you read Chumash on Midbar, every turn we're rebelling. And Moshe, he becomes our biggest defender, our biggest advocate, even if we didn't deserve his patience. He had patience for us. Moshe is the Vayechal Moshe, right? Vayechal, he beseeches HaKadosh Baruch Hu on our behalf. What the Medrash is teaching us is, in this pasuk, that the divine presence is reflected in the biography of our great leaders. That's what these words mean. It's not a moment frozen in history, biblical history, between Esav and Yaakov. This is a lesson for all times. Our teachers, our great leaders, are a biography of how to act, imitating HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what the Medrash meant in Bereshis Rabbah, when it says Yaakov's image was engraved on the Kisei HaKavod. The Medrash says that Yaakov's image is on the Kisei HaKavod. Kisei HaKavod in Shemayim, Yaakov is there. Yaakov is called El. Now we can understand what the Gemara meant that we started with. How do you interpret these words? Yaakov is called El. According to the observation that Rashi quoted, is because when we look at Yaakov, what do we see? How to act in a divine fashion, how to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we look at Avraham, Yitzchak, Moshe, right? Every one of them, what do we see? How to act in Hashem's way. One further lesson the Rav taught pertaining to the word El. The Gemara states that El means power and strength. El is a word for power and strength. Lavan said this back in Perek Lamed Aleph, Posuk Lamed Tes. Let's go to Lamed Aleph, Chof Tes, except not Lamed Tes, Chof Tes. It's on page 164. Yesh le'el yodi la'asos imachem ra'a. This is Lavan talking. Yaakov answered to, 1 second, where am I? Chof Tes, 29. It is in my power. Yesh el yodi. El means power, strength. El yodi. It's in the strength of I have the power to inflict harm upon you. El also means strength and power. If this is correct, what could El, power and strength, mean in reference to Yaakov? Here it says right in our pasuk, Vayikra lo El Elokei Yisrael. And remember, the Gemara says, and this can mean Yaakov. Not El can mean Yaakov, not Hashem. But what does strength and power have to do with Yaakov? And the Rav answered that Yaakov had the ultimate strength of character because he endured not one, but 2 exiles. And he emerged from both with his religious commitment intact. Yaakov becomes the Ish Golus, par excellence. Yaakov demonstrates to us how we Jews are to live in Golus. That's Yaakov. Yaakov becomes the paradigm of how to live in Golus. We don't in any way jeopardize our commitment to Yiddishkeit. And that's what Yaakov taught us. He didn't go into 1 exile, he went into 2 exiles, right? He goes into the exile of Lavan, and then he goes into the exile of Mitzrayim at the end of his life. And in both cases, he shows his commitment to Yiddishkeit is intact. He has amazing strength of character that he became the Jew that we are to emulate. So that's how the Rav understands these psukim. So let's wrap it up. In this story of their reunification of Yaakov and Esav, after 21 years, what does Yaakov and Esav, what is the whole story teaching us? It's not a moment. First of all, the Rav asks a very simple question. How did Esav suddenly accept Yaakov? And so what does he answer? Yaakov prepared for that encounter, which is lesson number 1. And everything you do in life, my father would always say, would always tell us, be prepared. Became a joke in our house. We quote my father saying, when a parent is known for certain expressions, they become routine, right? So my father, if I would tell my brothers, mi amar el mi, be prepared, we'd all smile and we'd all say, Abba. Abba always said, no matter what you're going to do, be prepared. My father's name was Yaakov, by the way. So he's right, 100%. What is this story telling us? Be prepared. Yaakov didn't encounter Esav without preparing. And the Gemara, the Medrash, Rashi quotes it, says he did 3 things, and it worked like a charm. By sending that gift, he melted Esav, right? He wore down Esav. Esav's hatred was appeased. And so he was able to accept Yaakov. It's a very important lesson that the Rav notes. Number 2, he says that Esav becomes indicates a willingness to accept the reality that Birkas Avram is not his. Birkas Avram is Yaakov's. After all of this, he realizes the bracha that Abba wanted to give me wasn't for me. It really was for you. Because I defied Abba and Ima. I defied Yitzchak and Rivka. I married Benos Canaan. But this, Chazal therefore said, you already indicated a shmek of being about tshuva, and you didn't take it all the way. You should have given Dinah. That's the way Chazal does, accept that or not, but that's the way Chazal understands it. And then the Rav understands that Esau then says to him, what? Let us walk together. Let us go together after reunion. What does that mean? So the Rav understood that to mean a statement of understanding anti-Semitism throughout the generations. What was Esav saying to Yaakov? Be like me and I'll be like you. Everybody will be the same. And what does Yaakov answer? No way. No way. I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. You go to Seir. You're not to come to Eretz Yisrael. And Yaakov doesn't go to Seir. Yaakov doesn't come to Seir. Even though Esav wants this. We'll be our friends. They'll accept. No, we can be friends from a distance, not together. Our lives are so different. The anti-Semites always look at the Jew and say, why does he have to be so different? And finally, the end of the pasuk, Vayetzev Sham Mizbeach, there he builds a Mizbeach, Vayikra Lo, and Hashem calls El Elokei Yisrael. Who does this mean? So simple. Pshat means HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yaakov's calling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but no, maybe Hashem is calling to Yaakov, right? That's the way the Gemara understands it. That's not how we paskin lahalacha. We paskin lahalacha, this is one of God's names. El Elokei Yisrael. Kel Elokei Yisrael. Correct? Oh, fine. And that's the way the Sofer has to have intent when he writes this pasuk. But the Gemara was telling us that Yaakov was being called upon by Hashem to be my representative on this earth so that people would know how to act. And then the Rav said, our religious leaders throughout the generations have been the models that we know how to act. With Yitzchak being sacrifice, Yaakov being staka, Moshe being patience, Yosef not taking revenge, etc., etc. Aharon for shalom. Correct. Each one is teaching us a different midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how we have to literally internalize it. And then finally, the Rav wants to understand El Elokei Yisrael can mean strength. El can mean strength. How is Yaakov being represented as strength? And the Rav notes, the Yaakov's life story is being represented here because Yaakov never gave up, even though he went into exile twice, he never gave up and never compromised his commitment to Torah, to mitzvahs. Okay? So that's how the Rav understands this story, not a moment in biblical history, but if you will, a paradigm for us all to follow throughout history, right? It becomes the model for us to emulate. Okay, we'll pick up next week.
Thank you very much. Very, very. Thank you. Very good. Very